June 5, 1977. A Sunday morning in Harlem. The newsstand on 125th Street opens at dawn. The magazine hits the rack with a thud that echoes through the underworld. Black cover. Bold yellow letters. A face that shouldn't exist in public. The man on the cover is smiling. Custom leather jacket. Gucci frames. Gold chains catching studio lights like a movie star accepting an Oscar for his own destruction. His name is Leroy Nicky Barnes. And in that moment, he just signed his own death warrant. 3 miles away, in a quiet apartment that doesn't appear on any government list, another man sits at his kitchen table. No cameras, no interviews, no magazine covers. Frank Lucas holds that same issue in his hands. He's not angry. He's not jealous. He's not worried. He's laughing. Not the laugh you share with friends. Not the laugh that comes from joy. This is the laugh of a chess master watching his opponent move their queen into checkmate. This is the laugh of a teacher watching a student fail the only test that matters in this business. The test of silence. Frank turns to his wife and says 4 words that will prove prophetic. He just killed himself. Because Frank Lucas learned something Nicky Barnes never did. Something whispered to him by a dying king named Bumpy Johnson in the back seat of a Cadillac while Harlem burned outside. The loudest man in the room is the weakest man in the room. At that moment, the heroin trade in New York City generates over $1 million per day. The streets flood with Frank's blue magic, 98% pure heroin that kills users instantly, which paradoxically becomes the ultimate marketing campaign. Meanwhile, the competition cuts their product down to 3% garbage. 2 empires, 2 philosophies, 2 kings. Nicky Barnes wanted the throne and the spotlight. Frank Lucas wanted the throne in the shadows. One of them built an empire worth $52 million by becoming invisible. The other destroyed a kingdom by becoming famous. This isn't just the story of 2 drug dealers. This is the story of 2 definitions of power. Respect or attention. The crown or the camera. The king or the celebrity. Nicky Barnes called himself Mr. Untouchable. Frank Lucas called him a dead man walking. July 7th, 1968. The room smells like death wrapped in Cuban cigars and old power. Bumpy Johnson lies propped against thin pillows, his 70-year-old heart failing with each labored breath, but his mind sharp as the day he first bent Harlem around his will. The curtains are drawn tight against the afternoon sun. No family, no lieutenants, no witnesses except the one man who matters. Frank Lucas sits in a wooden chair beside the bed, hands clasped, leaning forward like a student waiting for the final exam question that will determine his entire future. Outside, Harlem burns, riots in the streets, police sirens wailing. The assassination of Martin Luther King 3 months ago left the neighborhood raw, angry, searching for direction. But inside this cramped room that reeks of medicine and mortality, time has stopped. This is where empires transfer hands. This is where legends whisper their secrets before they die. Bumpy's hand shoots out, grabs Frank's wrist with strength that shouldn't exist in a dying man. The grip is a message. Pay attention. This is the last lesson, the only lesson that matters. Frank doesn't pull away. He leans closer, close enough to smell the fear beneath Bumpy's cologne, close enough to hear the rattle in his chest that sounds like coins shaking in a tin cup. "You listening, boy?" Bumpy's voice comes out raspy, each word costing him something precious. "I'm listening, Bump." "Good. Because I'm only going to say this once." Bumpy's eyes, usually cold as winter mornings, burn with urgency. The man who sits on the throne doesn't announce it. He just sits. The words land like a punch. Simple. Final. Absolute. Frank nods, but Bumpy isn't finished. He tells Frank about the real power in New York, not the movie version, the actual machinery. He explains how Lucky Luciano controlled the entire eastern seaboard from a barbershop in Brooklyn, and nobody outside 5 men knew his face. How Carlo Gambino ran construction, unions, and politicians while living in a modest house in Queens, driving a Buick, wearing department store suits from Alexander's. "Invisible kings," Bumpy whispers. "That's the secret. That's how you stay alive long enough to get rich." He coughs, his chest rattling like dice in a cup. Blood flecks his lips, but he keeps talking. He tells Frank about the opposite, the flashy gangsters of the 1920s. Dutch Schultz with his diamond rings, Legs Diamond with his silk suits, Pretty Boy Floyd with his newspaper headlines. "You know where they all ended up?" Bumpy asks. Frank shakes his head. Electric chair. Pine box. Federal prison. Fame is a spotlight, Frank, and a spotlight is just a clean shot for a man with a gun. Bumpy's grip tightens on Frank's wrist, cutting off circulation. "The government doesn't hunt ghosts," he says. "They hunt headlines. They hunt photographs. They hunt men stupid enough to tell reporters their real names." Frank absorbs every word like scripture. This isn't advice. This is inheritance. The kingdom isn't the money or the territory or the respect. The kingdom is the knowledge of how to keep it all without losing your life in the process. Bumpy closes his eyes, exhausted from the effort of speaking. Frank thinks the lesson is over. It isn't. "When you win, stay silent," Bumpy says without opening his eyes. "When they ask your name, lie. When they ask what you do, say nothing. You understand me? The loud man dies. The silent man lives. It's that simple." Across town, in a different Harlem, a different conversation is happening. Leroy Nicky Barnes walks out of Green Haven Correctional Facility after serving 5 years for possession. He's 35 years old, hungry as a wolf in winter, and convinced he's smarter than everyone who came before him. Barnes spent his prison time reading, studying, learning the architecture of power from library books and conversations with older convicts who remembered the glory days. He read about the Italian Commission, 5 families operating like a corporate board, territories divided, disputes mediated, unity through structure, revolutionary thinking for the streets. Barnes sees the blueprint and decides to build a black version. He calls it the Council, 7 major dealers, equal votes, shared profits, a black mafia for a new era. But Barnes misses the crucial element, the thing that makes the structure work. Omert. The code of silence that turns organization into invisibility. Barnes sees the power but ignores the shadow that must come with it. He believes a king without a crown isn't a king. He's just a man with money. While Frank sits in that death room learning to disappear, Barnes is planning to announce himself to the world. Back in the cramped room, Bumpy is fading fast. His breathing grows shallow, each inhale a mountain he has to climb. Frank sits on the edge of the bed, watching the only father figure he ever knew slip away breath by breath. "Listen to me," Bumpy whispers, using the last of his strength. "They gonna come to you. Guys from Brooklyn, from downtown, from New Jersey. They gonna smile, shake your hand, offer friendship, business, protection." He coughs, fighting for air. "You don't need them. You deal with them, but you don't need them. You stay small in public, big in private. Money is loud. Respect is quiet. Choose quiet." His hand slips from Frank's wrist, fingers loosening like he's letting go of more than just flesh and bone. For the first time, fear flashes across Frank's face. Not fear of the streets or the competition or the police. Fear of the silence that comes when this voice stops speaking forever. "What am I supposed to do when you're gone?" Frank asks. Bumpy looks at him like the answer should be obvious. "Rule," he says, "but rule like a ghost. His chest rises one more time, one more climb, one more breath. Then it stops. The room goes very still. Outside, Harlem keeps moving. Cars honk. Kids shout. Life continues. But in here, an era just ended and another one is about to begin. Frank sits there for a long moment, staring at the man who built Harlem like a private kingdom and died in a room that cost $12 a night. No crown, no ceremony, no speech. He leans close to Bumpy's ear, voice barely above a whisper. "I'll be the ghost," he promises. "I swear to God, I'll be the ghost." 4 years later. 1972. Same city, different king. Frank Lucas steps out of a modest Chevrolet on a quiet street in Teaneck, New Jersey. No cameras, no reporters, no fanfare. Just another man in a conservative suit walking into another suburban house with trimmed grass and a clean driveway. Inside, the numbers are obscene. $1 million of heroin moved every week. Direct supply lines from the Golden Triangle. Military cargo planes. 98% pure product flooding the streets under a brand name nobody can trace to a face. Blue Magic, the purest heroin ever sold in America, and the man behind it is completely invisible. If you asked a detective in Harlem who ran the drug trade now, he'd give you 5 different names. All wrong. Because the real king learned to sit exactly where Bumpy told him to sit. On the throne. In the shadows. But across town another man is standing in front of a mirror, practicing a smile for cameras that haven't arrived yet. Leroy Nicky Barnes is about to make a very different decision about what it means to be untouchable. And that decision will prove that Bumpy Johnson's final lesson wasn't just wisdom, it was prophecy. Early 1970s. Frank Lucas solved a mathematical problem that had tormented black dealers for 50 years. The equation was simple but brutal. Buy heroin from Italian middlemen at $50,000 per kilo. Sell it on the street after they cut it down to 3% garbage. Watch white men in Brooklyn get rich off Harlem's addiction while you collect scraps from their table. For decades, this was the ceiling. You could be a king, but you were a king who paid rent to an emperor. Frank Lucas didn't want to pay rent. He wanted to own the building. So he did the impossible. He got on a plane to Bangkok. He walked into the Golden Triangle where poppies grow like weeds and warlords control territories larger than American states. No mafia chaperones. No Italian permission. Just a black man from North Carolina with a duffel bag full of cash and a revolutionary proposition. The meeting happens in a bamboo shack that smells like opium and old violence. Frank sits across from a Chinese general who commands armies and controls supply lines that feed half the planet's addiction. The man studies Frank through cigarette smoke, trying to decide if this stranger is brave or suicidal. "You came far," the general says. "I came for the source," Frank answers. Money hits the table, more cash than most villages will see in a decade. Frank makes his offer clear. He wants pure heroin. 98%. Uncut. Straight from the fields. He'll handle everything else. Shipping. Distribution. Risk. "Why should I sell to you directly?" the general asks. "Your people already buy from my people." "Because your people are robbing you," Frank says. "They cut your product down to garbage and sell it in America for 10 times what they pay you." You want partners or you want customers? The handshake changes the map of American crime forever. Frank arranges military cargo shipments through corrupt officials who understand that war creates opportunities for men smart enough to exploit them. Coffins coming back from Vietnam filled with more than just dead soldiers. Pure heroin, hidden in false compartments, invisible shipments into American air bases that nobody searches because nobody questions a body bag. Blue magic is born from that handshake, not just a product, a weapon. While the street sells garbage that's 3% heroin and 97% filler, Frank floods Harlem with products so pure it kills users on first injection. In the twisted logic of addiction, these deaths become the ultimate marketing campaign. If it's strong enough to kill, it's strong enough to chase away every demon they're running from. Frank operates his empire like a ghost corporation. No street hustlers who talk too much, no flashy lieutenants who attract attention. He goes home to North Carolina and recruits family. Brothers, cousins, nephews, men bound by blood, not business. Men who know how to shoot squirrels from 100 yards but don't know a single detective in New York. They move through Harlem like postal workers, modest cars, conservative clothes, invisible. Frank's rule is absolute. No talking, no bragging, no fur coats in the front row at Madison Square Garden. You get rich quietly, or you don't get rich at all. Money is private. Power is silent. Respect doesn't need a spotlight. While Frank builds his invisible empire, Nicky Barnes constructs something completely different. The council. 7 major dealers sitting around a conference table like corporate executives. Revolutionary structure for the streets. Black men operating with the same organizational sophistication as the Italian Commission. Territories divided. Profits shared. Disputes mediated through votes instead of violence. But Barnes adds something the Italians would never do. He makes it visible. Barnes believes spectacle is strategy. He rolls through Harlem in a custom Mercedes with license plates that might as well read King. He wears chinchilla coats in July, the fur so thick it looks like he's wrapped in clouds made of money. At Small's Paradise, he walks to the bar, peels off $10,000 in cash, slams it down, and announces loud enough for the entire club to hear. Drinks on Mr. Untouchable. The room explodes. Glasses raised, women screaming, men bowing. Barnes doesn't just sell drugs, he sells mythology. The idea that a black man can be rich, powerful, and famous in America without apologizing for any of it. He's not hiding from the system, he's celebrating in front of it. For a while, both empires coexist, different territories, different philosophies, same city. But Harlem is a finite ecosystem. There's only so much money to be spent, and the customers start voting with their veins. The collision begins quietly. Junkies walk past Barnes's dealers, ignoring the sales pitch and the flashy cars, to find the quiet man on the corner selling blue magic. Barnes' product is stepped on 5 times. Frank's product is raw. It's not competition, it's slaughter. Barnes starts losing millions. His paranoia spikes. He assumes betrayal within the council. He interrogates lieutenants. He threatens. He investigates. But he never considers the truth. He's not being betrayed from within. He's being outmaneuvered by a man he's never met. A ghost who learned that the best way to win a war is to make your enemy fight shadows. The tension explodes on 116th Street. A proxy war nobody understands. Barnes's visible army against Frank's invisible network. Territory changing hands. Money moving in directions that don't make sense to outsiders. But you can't fight what you can't see. Frank's people don't posture. They don't threaten. They vanish when heat arrives and reappear when it leaves, always with that deadly blue packet. Barnes grows desperate. Frustrated, he's losing the one thing he values more than money. His reputation as the undisputed king of Harlem. His legend is being bled dry by an invisible competitor, and it's driving him insane. So Barnes makes a calculation. A fatal calculation. If his enemy hides in darkness, he'll step further into the light. Visibility isn't the problem. Visibility is the solution. He'll become so famous, so legendary, so untouchable that his competitors will have no choice but to retreat into whatever holes they're hiding in. He picks up the phone and dials a number that no drug dealer in their right mind should possess. "Get me the New York Times Magazine," he tells his lawyer. The lawyer hesitates. "What for?" Barnes stares at his reflection in the mirror, a man in love with his own mythology. "I want to tell my story." The words hang in the air like a death sentence. When whispers of that conversation drift through the same street channels that have always fed him intelligence, the news eventually reaches Frank Lucas. He's sitting in his modest kitchen in Teaneck, counting money with the quiet precision of an accountant, when one of his people delivers the message. "Barnes is talking to reporters," the man says. "Says he wants the world to know who he is." Frank stops counting. He closes his eyes like he just heard a funeral announcement. Bumpy's voice echoes in his memory. The loud man dies. The silent man lives. Frank doesn't get angry. He doesn't make threats. He doesn't call emergency meetings. He just sits there in his unremarkable house wearing unremarkable clothes, running an empire worth $52 million that exists completely in the shadows. And he waits, because he knows that Nicky Barnes just failed the only test that matters in this business. The test of silence. The student is about to learn what happens when you trade the throne for the camera, when you choose fame over survival, when you announce yourself to a system that hunts headlines, not ghosts. Frank doesn't need to lift a finger. The government will do the work for him. They don't hunt invisible men, they hunt magazine covers. And Nicky Barnes is about to give them the biggest target of the decade. The phone call is made. The appointment is scheduled. The photographer is booked. Mr. Untouchable is about to become very, very touchable. June 5th, 1977. Sunday morning. The sun crawls over Harlem like a lazy predator, casting long shadows across empty streets. On 125th Street, a newsstand owner cuts the plastic binding on a fresh stack of magazines. The first copy tumbles out, black cover catching the early light. He stares, blinks twice, calls his wife over because what he's seeing shouldn't exist in the real world. The camera flashes sound like gunshots echoing from 3 weeks ago. Nicky Barnes stands in a rented Midtown studio, wrapped in an American flag backdrop like the country finally belongs to him. Custom leather jacket. Denim suit underneath. Those signature Gucci frames reflecting studio lights like mirrors made of arrogance. Gold chains hanging heavy around his neck, each link worth more than most families see in a year. The photographer circles him like prey, but Barnes believes he's the predator. "Chin up a bit, Nicky. Look confident." Barnes doesn't need direction. Confidence is his religion. He adjusts those oversized frames and stares into the camera lens like he's staring down the entire justice system, daring them to blink first. "You really want me to print that?" the reporter asks, scribbling notes. "Mr. Untouchable?" Barnes smirks, that trademark grin spreading across his face like spilled ink. "Spell it right," he says. Makes it easier for them to remember. He believes he's found the glitch in the system. Legal technicalities. Paid-off witnesses, intimidated jurors, appeals that stretch for years. He's beaten 13 cases that should have buried lesser men. In his mind, this photo shoot isn't challenging the government, it's outsmarting it. This is the victory lap for a man who thinks he's rewritten the rules of gravity. The flash pops again. Each burst is another nail in a coffin he doesn't see being built. Between shots, he provides quotes that prosecutors will later read aloud in courtrooms, each sentence another shovel of dirt on his own grave. "The police say you may be Harlem's biggest drug dealer," the journalist says. Barnes leans back, arms folded, that flag behind him like a dark mirror image of presidential power. "They can say whatever they want," he answers. But can they prove it? That question becomes the headline. The challenge. The funeral announcement disguised as a coronation. Back to the newsstand. The magazine hits the rack with a thud that echoes through the underworld. Black cover, bold yellow letters screaming across America like a declaration of war against common sense. The man on the cover is smiling. Studio lights catching his Gucci frames like a movie star accepting an Oscar for his own destruction. People stop just to stare. Some laugh. Some shake their heads. Some feel a chill. Because even in the underworld there's an unspoken rule: you don't throw gasoline on a fire and dare the wind to blow. The magazine travels. Delivery trucks carry it to breakfast tables across America. Police precincts, FBI offices, DIA headquarters, and eventually the Oval Office. President Jimmy Carter picks up that issue during his morning briefing, a born-again Christian staring at a man who calls himself untouchable, getting rich off poison pumped into black neighborhoods. The headline doesn't impress him. It insults him. Not anger, insult. This drug dealer, this criminal poisoning American cities, is openly mocking the entire justice system, calling himself untouchable, posing for magazines like he's a statesman instead of a cancer eating away at the country's soul. Carter turns to his attorney general, voice flat but deadly. Who is this man, and why is he still on the street? That question becomes marching orders. Within 48 hours, a task force materializes overnight. Prosecutors, FBI agents, DIA investigators, Ayers accountants. Every agency that has ever wanted a piece of Barnes suddenly has presidential permission to coordinate unlimited resources toward one singular mission: destroy Nicky Barnes. The Untouchable headline stops being journalism. It becomes a personal challenge to every prosecutor in America, a dare, a taunt, and the government never backs down from a dare when the whole country is watching. Meanwhile, in his penthouse high above the streets he sells to, Barnes holds that magazine like a father holding his newborn child. Floor-to-ceiling windows, glass tables, white carpet that has never known a cheap shoe. He opens a box with fresh copies, pulls one out with reverence like scripture. He frames it immediately, hangs it on his living room wall between expensive art he doesn't understand and furniture that costs more than most people's houses. His girlfriend walks in, sees him admiring his reflection in glossy paper. "Baby, is this smart?" she asks. Barnes turns to her, still smiling, still believing, still blind to the precipice he's standing on. "They can't touch me," he says, voice soft with wonder. "I'm a legend now." But legends are just stories people tell. And sometimes those stories end with a man in chains. 3 miles away, in a quiet house in New Jersey, Frank Lucas sits at his modest kitchen table. Same magazine, same cover, different reaction entirely. He doesn't frame it. He doesn't celebrate. He laughs. But it's not joy. It's not admiration. It's the cold, quiet laugh of a chess master watching his opponent move their queen into checkmate. It's the laugh of a teacher watching a student fail the only test that matters in this business. Frank flips through the article, eyes scanning the details Barnes gave away for free. His wealth, his power, his business structure. Mentions of the council, direct quotes, his own words, his own voice, his own rope. He's giving them the blueprint, Frank mutters to his wife. She watches him, half curious, half testing. "You jealous?" Frank shakes his head, Bumpy's voice echoing from 1968. "The loud man dies, the silent man lives. He just killed himself," Frank says. "He just doesn't know it yet." Frank understands something Nicky never learned. The system can ignore rumors. It can dismiss whispers. It can't ignore a declaration of war printed on glossy paper and sold on every street corner in America. So Frank moves, not loudly, carefully. He starts insulating his operation like a ship captain preparing for a hurricane. Money gets shifted, From obvious accounts to deeper shadows. Real estate holdings move into other names. Associates with big mouths get phased out, reassigned, or retired. Loose connections get cut clean. "We treat this like a hurricane," Frank tells his brothers. "Board up the windows. Wait it out." "But they're after Nicky," one cousin says. "Not us." Frank stares him down with the patience of a man who understands ecosystems. They don't know the difference when the water starts rising. The irony is brutal and perfect. Barnes's choice to be visible threatens the one thing Frank built his empire on: invisibility. The spotlight Barnes craved is about to sweep across Harlem, and anything it touches burns. When federal investigators start pulling threads on one dealer, they don't stop until the entire tapestry unravels. 3 months pass like a countdown timer. September 1977. The hammer drops. Federal agents swarm Barnes's operation at dawn. Battering rams on steel doors. Guns drawn. Helicopters overhead. The kind of raid usually reserved for international terrorists, not drug dealers. They drag him out of his penthouse in handcuffs, barefoot, still half in last night's silk. The cameras are waiting. Because of course they are. The man who loved visibility gets visibility, just not the kind he imagined. As agents push him toward the courthouse steps, a reporter shoves a microphone in his face, voice cutting through the chaos. "Do you regret the magazine cover, Nicky?" Barnes stops, looks directly into the camera, and flashes that same smile from the photo shoot. Arrogant, unbroken, still believing he's untouchable even as the cuffs cut into his wrists. "I regret nothing," he says. Click. Flash. History. The footage plays on every news channel. That smile. Those words. The perfect soundbite for a man who still doesn't understand he's already dead. Across the river, Frank Lucas watches from his living room. His wife sits beside him as Barnes gets loaded into a federal vehicle like cargo being shipped to oblivion. Frank turns to her, voice flat, emotionless. He just told the truth for once. She looks confused. "He said he regrets nothing," Frank explains. That's the first honest thing that man ever said. Because Barnes doesn't regret it. He can't. His kingdom was never really about the money or the drugs. It was about the myth. And the myth required the spotlight. He wanted fame more than freedom. He got exactly what he paid for. They sit in silence, watching the spectacle of a king being dethroned in real time. Frank feels something close to relief. The heat is focused. The target is clear. Barnes wanted the spotlight, and now he has it. All of it. But what Frank doesn't know, what he can't see from that quiet living room, is that the fire he predicted has already spread. Files with his name sit in federal drawers now. Anonymous agents, fueled by the same rage that Barnes triggered, start asking new questions about shapes moving in the shadows. Shapes that look like blue magic. Shapes that look like Frank Lucas. As Frank turns off the television, believing he's escaped the blast radius, a black sedan rolls slowly past his house. The driver takes a picture. Then another. Frank doesn't see them. He thinks he's safe because he stayed silent. He thinks the storm is only for the man who asked for it. He's wrong. The chaos Barnes created is a wildfire. And wildfires don't discriminate. They burn everything in their path, including the careful, the quiet, the men who thought silence was enough to keep them safe. Guilt by proximity. Punishment by association. The magazine cover that destroyed Nicky Barnes is about to reach further than anyone imagined. The feds aren't just looking for Mr. Untouchable anymore. They're looking for ghosts, too. Life plus 130 years. No parole. No appeals that matter. No technicalities left to exploit. Judge Knapp leans forward, reading glasses perched on his nose, like a bird of prey studying roadkill. His voice cuts through the silence like a blade through silk. "Mr. Barnes, you wanted to be famous. You posed for magazine covers. You called yourself Untouchable." He pauses, letting the words hang in the air like smoke from an execution. "Well, congratulations. You got your wish. Now you'll die famous. In a cell." The gavel comes down like a guillotine blade. Guards move in with chains that rattle like dice in a cup. Barnes turns one last time to look at the courtroom gallery, searching for familiar faces. His girlfriend, his council members, his brothers in business who swore blood oaths around conference tables. The seats are empty, not sparse. Empty, like a theater after the show ends and everyone realizes the performance was never worth the ticket price. But Barnes doesn't break. Not yet. He still believes in the code, the council's rules. Loyalty above money. Family above everything. He walks toward that cage thinking his empire will hold. His money will move, his woman will wait, his council will honor the man who built their kingdom. He is catastrophically, heartbreakingly wrong. Marion Federal Penitentiary. 3 months later. Prison is a cruel mirror that strips away mythology and leaves only brutal truth. 23 hours of solitary. 1 hour of supervised exercise in a concrete box that sees sunlight like a rumor. Just letters. Letters that arrive less frequently until they stop completely. The betrayal comes in waves. First, his lawyer cuts a deal with federal prosecutors, handing over financial records, offshore account numbers, the entire architecture of Barnes's wealth in exchange for immunity. Millions of dollars, gone. Vanished into accounts Barnes can't access from a cell he can't leave. Then the personal knife twist. A letter from a friend who can't keep secrets. His girlfriend, the woman he trusted with keys to penthouses and combinations to safes, is sleeping with one of his own council members. Not hiding it, flaunting it. Living in his apartment, spending his money, laughing at jokes about the man rotting in federal prison while they build a new kingdom on the ashes of his. Barnes sits on his bunk, staring at that letter until the words blur. Something breaks inside him that can't be fixed. Not rage, worse. The realization that loyalty was always a fairy tale he told himself. The council was just 7 dealers pretending to be brothers until the money stopped flowing and the king stopped watching. Meanwhile, the wildfire Barnes started finally reaches New Jersey. January 1978. Dawn raid on Frank Lucas's modest home in Teaneck. Federal agents with battering rams and search warrants thick as phone books tear through his house like archaeologists excavating a tomb. They find it hidden above his daughter's bedroom. $584,000 in cash, wrapped in plastic. More money than most Americans will see in 10 lifetimes, stuffed in a space designed for insulation. Frank sits calmly at his kitchen table while agents destroy his house, watching them work with the detached interest of a man observing weather he can't control. No screaming, no threats, no emotional breakdown. When they cuff him, he doesn't resist. When they read his rights, he doesn't interrupt. "Call my lawyer," he says. 2 words, because Frank understands something Barnes is still learning in his cell 300 miles away. Emotion is expensive. Revenge is a luxury. Survival is mathematics. The impossible choice arrives for both men in different cells, different states, same question. Die in prison as a legend or become what the streets despise most, a rat, an informant. A man who trades names for years, loyalty for freedom. Barnes chooses vengeance disguised as cooperation. He doesn't see it as betrayal. He sees it as justice. They broke the code first. So he calls federal prosecutors and says 5 words that will rewrite criminal history. "I want to testify." About everyone. His cooperation becomes a massacre delivered in a courtroom. Barnes sits in the witness stand for weeks, naming names, detailing operations, describing murders like he's reading a grocery list. Methodical, thorough. Devastating. 44 people go to prison because Nicky Barnes opens his mouth. Frank's approach is different, colder, more calculated. He doesn't cooperate out of emotion. He cooperates out of algebra. He treats it like a business transaction. Minimum information for maximum sentence reduction. Strategic demolition instead of total destruction. He gives them corrupt cops, dirty officials, military personnel who helped ship heroin in body bags, people who can't hurt his family because they're already compromised. Barnes testifies from rage. Frank negotiates from logic. One man wants revenge. The other wants to see his grandchildren. The man who called himself Mr. Untouchable becomes the most famous informant in American history. His testimony destroys the black mafia infrastructure in New York like a building with the foundation removed. The king burns his own kingdom to ash just to watch his enemies choke on the smoke. Frank watches the coverage from his own cell. Different prison. Same television. He sees Barnes on the stand, sees the destruction, sees the competition eliminated. And Frank understands the final irony. Barnes's last act of noise has created the silence Frank always preferred. Not the silence of discipline, the silence of a graveyard. Everyone who knew too much is now in prison or dead. The ecosystem is scorched earth. Barnes thinks he's getting revenge. He's actually finishing the job Frank started, clearing the board, creating a vacuum that will take decades to fill. The man who loved the spotlight just burned down the entire theater, and in the ashes, Frank sits in his cell doing math, calculating years saved, money protected, family members who stayed free. Barnes chose pride disguised as vengeance. Frank chose survival disguised as business. Both men became rats. But only one understood that in this game, the loudest rat dies first. Because legends die in cells or on magazine covers, ghosts just fade away. And fading away means you might still be alive when the doors finally open. The silence Barnes created isn't victory. It's the sound of an empire eating itself alive, one testimony at a time. Decades pass like blood through water. The Harlem they fought over disappears, replaced by coffee shops and condominiums where corners used to run red with territorial wars. The names that once made grown men tremble are just whispers in barbershops. Stories old hustlers tell to young dealers who don't listen because they think this time will be different. Two kings. Two endings. Two definitions of what it means to survive your own legend. In 1982, Leroy Nicky Barnes walks out of federal prison through a side door nobody photographs. No cameras, no reporters, no magazine covers. Just a man in government-issued clothes climbing into an unmarked sedan that smells like bureaucracy and broken promises. His sentence was commuted for cooperation. His identity is being erased as payment for 44 convictions. The man who craved fame is now legally forbidden from being known. Witness protection doesn't feel like freedom, it feels like burial while still breathing. They give him a new name that doesn't fit his mouth. A new social security number. A new birthday, a modest house in suburban nowhere where strip malls outnumber ambitions and neighbors ask questions about lawn care instead of empires. He's instructed never to contact anyone from his previous life. Not his children, not his friends, not even the enemies he destroyed. Barnes lives this way for 30 years. Different cities, different names, always anonymous, always invisible. The ultimate irony carved into his existence like a scar. The man who wanted to be a legend becomes the exact thing Frank Lucas chose willingly, a ghost. But not the ghost he wanted to be. Not the mythic shadow ruling from darkness, just erased, forgotten. The wrong kind of invisible. He shops at grocery stores where cashiers don't care about his mythology. He mows lawns. He pays taxes under fake names. He watches crime documentaries about himself and screams at the television because they get it all wrong, but he can't tell anyone the truth without dying. Barnes dies in 2012. Cancer. Quietly. In a hospital room where nurses call him by a pseudonym. No massive funeral. No procession through Harlem. No weeping crowds. Just a body transported to a morgue under an identity that never really existed. The world doesn't even know he's gone. 7 years later, 2019, the New York Times finally publishes his obituary. Nicky Barnes, Harlem Kingpin, dead at 78. The news hits like a delayed echo. People read it over morning coffee and think, wasn't he already dead? Even in death, his timing is wrong. Frank Lucas takes a different path. He serves his time, does his years, keeps his mouth shut about things that matter and talks about things that don't. He emerges in the early 90s, an old man stepping back into a world that forgot the rules he lived by. But Frank doesn't hide. He lives quietly under his own name. He grants interviews only when statute of limitations has turned his crimes into history. He helps Hollywood tell his story, shaping the narrative one final time. When Denzel Washington plays him on screen, Frank watches from his living room like a man observing his own mythology from a safe distance. Frank dies in 2019. The same year the world learns Barnes is dead, but Frank dies in his own bed, surrounded by family who know exactly who he is. He dies as Frank Lucas. The philosophical ledger balances itself. Barnes wanted the throne and the spotlight. Got neither. Frank wanted the throne and the shadows. Got both, temporarily. But both men fell to the same system they thought they could outsmart. The difference is surgical. Frank fell because of evidence. Barnes fell because of ego. We return now to that kitchen in 1977. Frank Lucas holding the magazine. That laugh, that cold, private sound that people thought was mockery. They were wrong. Frank wasn't laughing at Nicky's stupidity, he was laughing at himself. Because years earlier, in 1971, Frank had stood in front of a mirror just like Nicky. He had felt that same hunger to be known, to be famous, to step into the light and claim credit for outsmarting everyone. He had almost called a reporter, almost agreed to an interview, almost posed for the photograph that would have destroyed everything. But Bumpy's voice came back from the grave. The loud man dies, the silent man lives. Frank hung up the phone, stayed in the shadows where kings survive and celebrities die. Barnes never had a Bumpy, never had a mentor who loved him enough to teach him that silence isn't weakness, it's armor. That laugh wasn't mockery, it was relief. The sound of a man watching a car crash, he narrowly avoided himself. The sound of gratitude for learning the lesson before taking the test. Both men are dead now. Both stories finished. And the lesson remains absolute. The throne doesn't care who sits on it. It only cares who stays silent enough to keep it. In the end, it's not about who can shout the loudest. It's about who gets to write the final chapter. Barnes's chapter was written by prosecutors. Frank's chapter was written by Frank. And that makes all the difference between a legend and a ghost story.